it do? It's your boy Cinco Benz the man, looking like 100 grand. Hey, look like my boy, NBA young boy, man. He got 2 years, 3 months to do, man. Hey, hope he could do it right. You feel me? Get out and get back on this shit, man. But y'all check this shit out, man.
Had their cases resolved before this court, and those co-defendants were intercepted as they were trying to pick up the fraudulent prescription at Larry's Pharmacy in Smithfield here in Cache County. Those two individuals were using Mr. Galden's vehicle to make the pickup, and they were detained by law enforcement. And shortly thereafter, someone contacted law enforcement pretending to be an elderly woman to whom the fraudulent prescription belonged. The prescription was listed to be for a Gwendolyn Cox, but this elderly woman, who was clearly someone pretending to be an elderly woman, said her name was Gwendolyn White and couldn't provide a birth year. This is important because fraudulent names such as Beatrice White, Bethel White, Carolyn White, Harriet White, Anna White, and Gwendolyn White were all being used through this scheme. There were two other pharmacists here in Cache County that immediately recognized this fake elderly woman's voice from that phone call as the same person who had called into their pharmacies checking in on a prescription under some of those aforementioned names for promethazine with codeine. And all of these prescriptions had been called in by someone portraying themselves to be a Dr. James Woodmansey, who is a legitimate doctor in the Provo, Utah area, but he was contacted by law enforcement and by several of these other prescription outlets, and he had verified that these were all fraudulent prescriptions that he had not authorized. Ultimately, Mr. Galden ended up in contact with the detective investigating this case when he was trying to get his vehicle out of impound after it was taken from the Larry's Pharmacy incident. During that phone call, Mr. Galden had engaged in a conversation with a third person and had asked him about the prescription they picked up. At that time, it became clear that Mr. Galden had some involvement beyond simply lending his vehicle to be used, where he had some knowledge of the fraudulent prescription being retrieved. In addition, there was one prescription called in for Control Galden, but the date of birth for that prescription was in 1953, which was clearly a false date of birth and is consistent with some of those date of births used with the false elderly women names throughout this fraudulent scheme. That prescription was picked up by an individual who was intercepted by law enforcement. Shortly thereafter, promethazine with codeine, along with other prescriptions, had been called in to that same pharmacy for Mr. Galden, utilizing his accurate date of birth. Mr. Galden, however, while he was on a federal probation, was only afforded a single doctor to issue prescriptions with a single pharmacy, and the doctor who called that prescription in was inconsistent, and that pharmacy was inconsistent with those which had been allowed through probation. In the end, there was a search warrant executed on Mr. Galden's residence. Law enforcement found a prescription bottle in Mr. Galden's bathroom inside the master bedroom. The bottle was for a Caroline White, one of the known fraudulent names, with the corresponding prescribing doctor who had confirmed the fraud. The prescription was for doxycycline, and the prescription bottle was consistent with the time frame and patient information for the promethazine with codeine that had also been picked up, according to a subsequently gathered Doppel report. Also in the bathroom was a prescription for doxycycline to Control Galden, also prescribed by the same doctor and the previously confirmed as fraud. This is consistent with the promethazine with codeine that had been prescribed with Control's fake date of birth, and a prescription bottle of promethazine with codeine was also found inside the defendant's bathroom with no prescription label on the bottle. And a further search of the defendant's residence yielded 3 more bottles of promethazine with codeine. More specifically to these counts, Your Honor, on September 19th of 2023, Reed's Pharmacy in Hiram received a prescription called in for a Bethel White with a claimed date of birth of November 10th of 1949. On September 19th, 2023, Spence's Pharmacy received a similar phone call for a Gwendolyn Cox with a fraudulent date of birth. On October 9th, 2023, Spence's Pharmacy received such a phone call with a fraudulent name. Cache Valley Pharmacy in North Logan had a prescription called in for a fraudulent individual. And on January 17th, 2024, Larry's Pharmacy in Smithfield received a call also from a fraudulent individual. Cook's Brothers Pharmacy in Providence in Cache County had a fraudulent prescription called in, and the Budge Clinic Pharmacy in Logan also had a fraudulent prescription called in. So ultimately, for each time a prescription was called in, there were 3 separate offenses: identity fraud, attempting to procure a prescription, and forgery. The identity fraud includes the use of a real physician's identifying information, that of Dr. James Woodmansey. The procurement of a prescription includes having other people procure or attempt to procure the prescriptions through deceit and lying about the relationship to the patient. And the forgery includes the act of authenticating the writing or the prescription in each instance, which purports to be the act of that Dr. James Woodmansey.
All right, thank you, Mr. Keller. That is a sufficient factual basis to support each of these 10 charges. Mr. Galden, to the charge of identity fraud, a third-degree felony, 2 separate counts, how do you plead to both of those charges? Guilty, not guilty, or no contest?
No contest.
To the charge of forgery, a third-degree felony, 2 separate counts, both of those being third-degree felonies, how do you plead to those 2 charges?
No contest.
To the charge of pharmacy fraud, a Class A misdemeanor, 6 separate counts, how do you plead to each 6 of those charges?
No contest.
The court finds that you have knowingly and voluntarily entered your no contest pleas. I've signed the statement of defendant and will now enter that into the record. You have the right to be sentenced in not less than 2 days and not more than 45 days. It's my understanding that you would like to waive time for sentencing and be sentenced today. Is that correct, Mr. Galden?
Yes.
Okay. Let's hear first today from Mr. Williams or any of his other attorneys. I think I understand, based on the negotiated settlement, that the attorneys with the state and with Mr. Galden agreed to ordering that he pay a fine in the amount of $25,000.
Correct.
And that once that's been paid, which you do have a cashier's check, that the court reduced the 4 felony charges pursuant to 76-3-402 down to 4 Class A misdemeanors, and that then the court should just close his case.
That's correct, Your Honor. And unless the court has any questions of me, I'm happy to submit if the court's comfortable with that.
I am comfortable with that. I don't have any questions, but I will give you a chance if you'd like to state anything further for the record.
Your Honor, just procedurally, I understand that it does take time for minute entries to be updated. As I indicated, have a cashier's check in the amount of $25,000. In fact, Mr. Keller has been kind enough it was mailed to his office, hold that for a couple of weeks for us. I'm asking the court to enter that order, reducing those now and closing the case, anticipating that I can give this to some court staff before I leave.
Sure.
So as if we're treating it as if it's been paid, I'm holding it now. I just don't know who to give it to.
Okay. Angie, how long does that? On the way down. Yeah. All right. So after we're done with the sentencing here today, you can just go down to the front counter and pay that fine.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything further that his counsel online need to put on the record? I think I understand the global resolution, but if you'd like to put anything further on the record, you can do so now.
No, Your Honor.
Anything from the state, Mr. Keller?
The state will submit based on that stipulated agreement. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Galden, the court is going to impose a fine in the amount of $25,000 in order you to pay that today. It does appear that you do have a cashier's check in that amount now. And so based upon the stipulation between the state of Utah and Mr. Galden, the court will reduce his 4 felony counts on the identity fraud and the forgery down 1 step to Class A misdemeanors pursuant to Utah Code 76-3-402. And your case will close. Now, the reason that the court is willing to sentence you to just the fine and then closing the case, Mr. Galden, is because it's been represented to me that there is a global resolution between federal prosecutors and state prosecutors whereby you will be serving a substantial amount of time in federal prison, apparently 27 months. And